Hey everyone, welcome back to Threaducation. In this video, we're going to be talking about the style evolution of Lil Yachty. And just to clarify, I don't mean the style of his music. Instead, we're going to be looking at how his sense of fashion has changed over the course of his career, including some of his best fits along the way. This is one I'm really excited for because I personally believe that Yachty is hands down one of the best dressed artists in the game, and by the end of the video, hopefully you'll see why that's the case. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is the style evolution of Lil Yachty. From the very beginning, one of Yachty's biggest style statements has been his hair. And this all started when he was inspired by the hip-hop duo Crisscross to grow out braids and tie them together with colorful rubber bands. He decided that he liked the look, and from there he continued letting them grow out, but around came his junior year of high school and his mother made him cut them off. As he recalls in his 2016 interview with No Jumper, the reason that she made him cut them off was because he had a job interview at McDonald's, and she was afraid that he would get rejected if he didn't. So Yachty cut his hair, and he got the job at McDonald's, but it turns out that this was all for nothing because he got fired just 3 weeks later for not showing up. As I'm sure you can imagine, he was pretty upset about the whole thing, but in an attempt to make him feel better, his mother suggested that he dye his hair red. This was sort of her way of apologizing and saying that he was free to do whatever he wanted with his hair, so he went ahead and did it. Now, it was towards the end of high school that Yachty really started pursuing music, and as you can see in some of his earliest music videos, like this one for his song Bittersweet, he has the red hair, but he hadn't yet developed a taste for higher end brands, and any interest that he did have in fashion came from his appreciation for thrifted vintage. That was great, and he still shares that same appreciation today, but things were about to change for him because after graduating from high school in Atlanta, he decided to move to New York for the summer. This might seem a bit random, but I can assure you that this was very strategic. You see, Yachty was looking for a way to jumpstart his rap career, and thanks to the internet, he was very well aware of the thriving New York streetwear scene. This included people like Luka Sabbat, Bloody Osiris, and Bloody Dior, just to name a few. Although fashion was their forte, the followings they'd each built online had established them as tastemakers, and Yachty was smart enough to realize that if he could get them to hear his music, there was a chance they'd share it and help him grow. With that in mind, he was able to get free airline tickets thanks to his dad's job at Delta, and he headed to New York to stay with some friends. Now again, this was just for the summer, and while his music career didn't make the leap he'd been hoping for, he did make connections in the streetwear community. This of course got him more into streetwear, and so this was around the time that he really started getting more into brands like Supreme. And as it turns out, the timing couldn't have been better. You see, Yachty also made a trip out to Los Angeles, and while at the airport, by complete chance, he ran into Ian Connor. Ian was one of the biggest fashion influencers at the time, and Yachty happened to be wearing a Supreme jacket that he wanted. Ian approached Yachty trying to buy the jacket, and while they couldn't strike a deal, they did begin talking about their shared interest in streetwear as well as some of their mutual connections from the New York streetwear scene. After this, they exchanged contact information, and although it would be a while before they got back in touch, keep this new friendship with Ian in mind because it will come back to play a very important part in this story. So like I said, Yachty's time in New York had been valuable, but it hadn't really propelled his music career in any way. So when the summer was over, he decided to enroll at Alabama State University. As he would soon discover though, college life wasn't for him. Not only did he find his classes boring, but people made fun of his hair relentlessly. And after just 2 months, he dropped out and moved back home to Atlanta. Now that school was no longer an option, music was really all he had left, and fortunately for him, he was about to get his first big break. In late 2015, Yachty uploaded his song One Night to SoundCloud, and at first it didn't really get any attention, but after being featured in the background of a comedy sketch by Kaylee on Fox, it went viral and skyrocketed to more than 1 million views. People were instantly intrigued by the unique sound of his voice as well as the melodic instrumental, and this interest in One Night snowballed into interest in some of his other songs like Minnesota. This helped Yachty build an online following of his own, but how exactly did he make the transition from a popping SoundCloud artist to a rising superstar? Well, to answer this question, we're gonna have to go back to Ian Connor. As I mentioned earlier, Ian and Yachty didn't talk much after their initial meeting, but once Ian caught wind of this new music, he knew that it was something special. He started sharing it with just about everyone he knew, and that included Kanye West. So some background here in case you haven't watched my video about the Ian Connor story. Ian's affiliation with the ASAP mob led him to working as a creative consultant for Kanye's brand Yeezy. One of his responsibilities in this role was casting models, and so he invited Yachty to appear in the fashion show for Yeezy Season 3, which, as you may remember, doubled as the release party for Kanye's album The Life of Pablo. This show had many different models in it, but Yachty was placed right alongside Ian and Young Thug, so he shared a lot of the spotlight. Not to mention, his bright red beads drew some attention in their own right. Before all of this, he had been getting popular on SoundCloud, but being one of the more prominent faces at Kanye West's fashion show catapulted him into mainstream media. And if people didn't already know who he was, they were now trying to find out. Funny enough, because it was Ian who picked Yachty for the show, Kanye didn't really know who Yachty was until after the show. As the story goes, he was riding in the car one day with Ian. Ian started playing Yachty's music, and Kanye asked who it was, only to find out it was the same kid with red hair who had been in his fashion show. This officially placed him on Kanye's radar, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but I do think it is cool to note that about 5 years after this, Yachty would be featured on Kanye's album Donda, so this was truly a full circle moment for him. Back to the story though, Yachty had a lot of eyes on him following his appearance at Yeezy season, and let's just say that he did not disappoint. Building off of the momentum he'd gained with his song One Night, he released his debut mixtape titled Lil Boat in March of 2016, and in addition to featuring some members from his crew known as the Sailing Team, it also featured major artists like Quavo and Young Thug. The tape was well received, and with a solid project under his belt, he could confidently say that he was not the one-hit wonder some critics had speculated he would be. And it's a good thing he got that established, because in April of 2016, just 1 month after the release of his mixtape, he partnered with Dram to release the smash hit single Broccoli. As I'm sure many of you remember, this song was being played everywhere when it dropped, and it actually peaked all the way at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. One Night had put Yachty on the map, but Broccoli was his way of saying that he was here to stay. All that said, it should come as no surprise that there were a number of labels interested in signing him, and in June of 2016, he entered into a joint deal with QC, Capitol Records, and Motown Records. This was a turning point in his career for many reasons, but one of the things it did was give him the money to start dressing the way he'd always wanted to. He could now afford to buy from streetwear brands he loved like Supreme and Bape, he could afford to buy some of the shoes he'd always wanted, and of course he could afford to buy jewelry. While it's true that this is what many rappers do when they get signed, make no mistake, Yachty's artistic expression has always been unique, and this is something that he would reflect in his personal style. In my opinion, one of the best and earliest examples of this was the series of appearances that he made for the 2016 XXL Freshman List. I'm sure most of you are familiar, but just to be clear, the XXL Freshman List is an annual list published by XXL Magazine featuring the year's most promising up-and-coming rappers. Given his recent hot streak, Yachty was a shoo-in that year, and he certainly left a strong impression. In his pitch video where the artists explained why they should make the list, he decided to wear a collared Yves Saint Laurent shirt with a plaid sweatshirt around his neck. This made for a very preppy look, the type that could quite literally be worn at a yacht club, but at the end of the day, this helped differentiate him from everyone else. Then, for the actual cypher, which if you ask me is the best XXL cypher of all time, Yachty switches things up completely by going with the Supreme Jordan brand collab hoodie and a pair of Red 11 Lab Jordan 4s. Was he leaning into his inner hypebeast here? Yeah, maybe a bit, but the point is that he was able to pull off two wildly different aesthetics. There are plenty of rappers who can dress well, but there are very few who can or even try to demonstrate this sort of range. Over the next few months, Yachty would continue growing in popularity, and perhaps more importantly, he would continue developing his personal brand. What is his personal brand, you may ask? Well, this technically all started back when he chose the name Lil Yachty. When he was first starting out, he actually rapped under the name RD, but switched to Lil Yachty after joining a group called the Yacht Club. From there, he started adopting a lot of nautical imagery such as boats and anchors, despite the fact that he had never been on a boat, and this made its way into his album artwork, merch, and as we just saw with the Yacht Club look, his personal style. Anytime that you associate yourself with a particular aesthetic, you're developing a strong brand, thus making yourself more marketable, and this is something that Yachty himself realized when his manager approached him with the idea of incorporating Nautica into his wardrobe. Nautica is a nautically themed brand that rose to prominence during the 90s, and so this was a perfect match for a nautically themed rapper with a love for vintage clothing. He agreed to start wearing Nautica, and in November of 2016 it paid off, because the brand invited him to model in one of their campaigns. They knew that he was becoming very influential among the youth, so this was a great opportunity for them as well. And the timing here was great because the month following his appearance in the campaign, Yachty partnered with Kyle to release their song I Spy, which reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. In other words, he had another smash hit on his hands, and it was starting to seem like everything he touched turned to gold. Wanting to capitalize off of that fact, Nautica invited him to design his very own collection. The collection would be released in September of 2017, the same year that he released his debut studio album Teenage Emotions, and while Yachty doesn't like to label himself as a designer, he was responsible for providing input on the styles, patterns, and color blocking that would be conducive to his own aesthetic. Also, a quick side note here, one of the models for the collection was Bloody Osiris, who he had become friends with during his time back in the New York streetwear scene, so yet again this was a full circle moment for him. Anyways, this collection was ultimately a success, and Nautica invited him to collaborate again in 2018, but this would end up being their final collaboration. At the time, Nautica was having financial trouble and the company was actually sold to new management, so this may have played a role in that, but this wasn't a problem for Yachty because he'd accomplished everything he wanted to there and already had other brands knocking on his door. As he discusses in his sneaker shopping episode with Complex, one of the first brands to reach out was actually Reebok. In his own words, he says that they were interested in collaborating on a boat shoe, but that he ended up declining because he simply didn't like the way that it looked. That wouldn't be the end of things though, because after his obligations with Nautica ended, he agreed to star in a few of their campaigns. This was great for the time being because Reebok had that same vintage retro vibe he'd been aiming for with Nautica, but things sort of fizzled out after these initial campaigns, and the partnership never really went any further than that. So to my knowledge, Yachty is technically a free agent right now, and I have a feeling that he's going to be keeping it that way for a while. I could be wrong about that, but what you have to understand is that brand deals can sometimes be very limiting. We've seen it time and time again where an artist signs a brand deal and they're only allowed to wear shoes and clothes made by that brand. I'm not sure if that was the case for his deals with Nautica and Reebok, but he did definitely wear those brands far more often while working with them, and I just can't see him committing to something like that right now. As I touched on earlier, he has an extremely wide range in style, and that style has evolved a lot during recent years. Nowadays he's very into high-end brands and designers like Craig Green, Vivienne Westwood, Walter van Beirendonck, the list goes on and on. Not only are these names that you rarely see other rappers wearing, but it takes real talent for anyone at all to style them the way that he does. And if you're wondering, he's made it clear on several occasions that he does not use a stylist. Even beyond these high-end designers, Yachty is still very into streetwear, but he's largely given up brands like Bape and Supreme, and has instead become the unofficial poster child of several cult favorites like Sicko, Hidden New York, and Jerome Jamal. I should also mention that over the course of his career, he's amassed what may very well be one of the greatest sneaker collections in the world. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend you go watch the closet tours he's done with Complex, but the point I'm trying to make here is that fashion has become one of Yachty's true passions, and even aside from his persona as a rapper, it has become a central part of his identity. In my opinion, what sets him apart from everyone else is that he has a great sense of style, but this sense of style doesn't stop at clothing. One thing we've already talked about is his hair, and while it isn't red anymore, it is still one of his biggest style statements. He's also known for having some of the best chains and grills in the game. And then the final thing that I want to talk about is that in May of 2021, he actually launched his own nail paint brand called Creed. To me, this is really cool because it's an area of self-styling that a lot of people in the rap community haven't explored yet, and Yachty and his team seem to be at the forefront of changing that. Anyways, that is just about everything I wanted to touch on for the style evolution of Lil Yachty. I'm sure that if you asked him about all of this, he'd say it's really not that serious and he's just wearing what he likes, but that's kind of the point. His style has changed a lot over the years, but it's always looked effortless, and that's why I'm really excited to see what direction it goes in over the next few years. As I said at the beginning of the video, I really do believe that he is one of the best dressed rappers, and in case there was any doubt left about how much I appreciate his sense of fashion, I actually bought one of his personal sweaters from a closet sale he did with Grailed. But that aside, I'm working on a lot of cool new videos right now, so if you liked this one and want to see more, please make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram at Threaducation for more fashion content. Other than that, thank you for watching Threaducation, and I will see you next time.
Sipping a peach soda.
Sipping a peach soda.